The galaxy learned to breathe again, though the breath came shallow and uncertain. Battlefields cooled into graveyards of silent metal and drifting ash. Ships floated where they had last fired, crews moving softly among the dead as if sound itself might offend what had passed. Stars shone as they always had, indifferent witnesses to a conflict that had almost rewritten their meaning. In the quiet after the storm, survivors found themselves listening to hulls creaking, to distant vox echoes, to their own thoughts, heavier now. Victory felt inappropriate. Defeat felt inaccurate. What remained was endurance, stripped of triumph, weighed down by memory. The war had not ended the galaxy. It had taught it restraint. On worlds spared annihilation, people rebuilt shrines with smaller hands and quieter prayers. Cathedrals rose again, but their walls were left unpolished, scars visible by design. Faith changed shape. No longer thundered from pulpits alone, it lived in kitchens, in barracks, in the pauses before sleep. The Emperor was still worshipped, but less as a blazing promise and more as a burden willingly borne. Those who had seen the green silence of Necron preservation spoke less, choosing instead to mend what could still feel pain. Suffering was no longer proof of holiness, but neither was its absence proof of salvation. Humanity walked a narrower path now, aware of how easily it could step aside. Trooper Jocks returned to a regiment that barely recognized him. He limped, his body reinforced with crude augmetics, his eyes older than his rank suggested. When asked what he remembered, he spoke only of moments of choosing to move when standing still would have been easier. At night, he dreamed of shelves filled with names and found comfort in knowing his own was not yet carved there. He did not think of himself as brave. He thought of himself as unfinished. When new recruits asked why he still fought, he answered simply, because stopping felt too much like agreeing. The memory of Sister Canoness Illyra became something fragile and powerful. Not a martyr enshrined in gold, but a voice passed hand to hand, whispered between squads before battle. Her final words were never standardized. Each telling changed them slightly, shaped by the needs of those listening. Yet the core endured, that faith was not certainty, but refusal. Chaplains argued over doctrine, soldiers nodded and carried on. Somewhere in the Imperium's endless war machine, her absence exerted pressure, bending decisions toward stands that logic alone could not justify. She had vanished into collapse and dust, but consequences lingered longer than monuments. On Terra, Cardinal Vane oversaw the sealing of archives newly deemed too dangerous for prayer. He aged visibly in the years that followed, his hair whitening beneath his mitre. He preached less often now, favoring written words that encouraged contemplation rather than obedience. Some called him weak. Others called him necessary. In private, he stood often before the Astronomicon, watching its light pulse with stubborn persistence. He no longer asked whether the Emperor was watching back. It was enough to know the light still required effort to maintain. That effort, he believed, was the point. Far beyond Imperial borders, Necron space settled into a colder, sharper equilibrium. Dynasties counted losses that could never be replaced, immortality proving less absolute than once believed. Nekrosor withdrew into calculation, his presence diminished but not erased. He no longer modeled the galaxy as a problem to be solved, but as a variable to be observed. Resistance had altered the equation. Choice had introduced inefficiency and meaning. He did not regret his awakening. He simply understood now that erasure was not the same as resolution. Somewhere deep within his logic, a question persisted, unresolved and unoptimizable. The Silent King resumed his long watch, burdened by knowledge only ancient rulers could carry. He had seen gods clash without annihilating one another, and understood the danger in that restraint. The future would not be clean. It would be contested, layered with compromise and contradiction. He issued quiet edicts, shaping Necron destiny away from absolute outcomes. Even among machines, memory proved difficult to silence. The war in heaven had never truly ended. It had only learned patience. Astropaths across the Imperium reported the same subtle change. The warp felt listening, not hostile, not calm, attentive, as if the great powers beyond reality had felt the tremor of something refusing to collapse into certainty. Demons whispered less boldly, prophecies fractured into probabilities. The galaxy had reminded itself that even gods could be challenged by choice, and the echo unsettled everything that fed on inevitability. I record these events not as a victory, nor as a warning, but as a remembrance. The Imperium endures, as it always has, on the edge of extinction and faith. The machines wait. The gods watch. Humanity continues, scarred but deliberate, choosing again and again to exist imperfectly rather than eternally still. Perhaps that is our defiance. Perhaps that is our flaw. In a universe that offers annihilation or silence, what does it mean to choose suffering and call it life? If this chronicle stirred something within you, if these echoes of faith and ruin lingered in your thoughts, remember to like, subscribe, and share this record with others. Leave your reflections in the comments below and let the memory endure. The moment broke without sound, no trumpet, no final prayer. The fleets collided at the edge of the nameless system, where void met void and meaning bled into motion. Imperial ships burned as they advanced, guns firing until barrels warped, crews chanting as if rhythm could defy mathematics. Necron fire answered with impossible calm, emerald lines carving through formation and faith alike. Space filled with debris and bodies and prayers cut short. Lord Admiral Kestel watched his flagship shields fail and felt no panic, only a fierce, quiet pride. They had drawn the line here. They had made the enemy commit. As his bridge collapsed into fire, Kestel whispered a single word, not for salvation, but for witness. Let someone remember this stand, even if the stars themselves forgot. On the surface below, the war reached its most brutal honesty. There were no grand maneuvers now, only survival measured in heartbeats. Trooper jacks ran through smoke and ruin, ears ringing, vision narrowed to targets and ground. Friends vanished mid-stride, erased so completely their absence felt like a lie. He fell, rose, screamed, fired. Time fractured into flashes, a banner burning, a commissar dying with a curse on his lips, a Necron construct shattering under concentrated fire. For one impossible instant, Jax felt the universe lean toward him as if asking a question. He answered with action, charging into green light with a defiance that had no logic. When he fell again, it was quietly, his body still, his choice complete. Sister Canoness Illyra faced Nekrosor's vanguard amid the ruins of what had once been a sanctuary. The air vibrated with power beyond sound, her armor trembling as if it recognized its own obsolescence. She fired until the bolter was empty, then threw it aside and advanced with blade drawn. Around her, the world dissolved, stone becoming dust, icons unraveling into memory. Nekrosor's presence pressed in, vast and impersonal, a god considering an insect that refused to move aside. Illyra spoke then, not shouting, not pleading. She spoke of pain embraced, of a god who chose to suffer rather than simplify existence. For a heartbeat, something shifted. Not hesitation, recognition. Nekrosor did not strike her down. The battlefield swallowed her instead, a collapse that erased her from sight, but not from consequence. In the heart of the tomb world, the integrated device reached critical resonance. Ancient mechanisms awakened fully, their purpose clarified at last. This was not a weapon meant to kill gods. It was a mirror meant to force choice. Nekrosor perceived its full design too late. The device did not oppose him. It demanded definition. As it activated, probabilities collapsed inward, converging on a single outcome shaped by every act of resistance, every refusal to surrender meaning. Nekrosor felt something new ripple through his calculations, a boundary he could not optimize away. The Emperor's presence flared in response, not as light overwhelming darkness, but as a counterweight. Two philosophies locked in resonance, neither able to erase the other without becoming what they opposed. Across the galaxy, Psychers screamed as the clash echoed through the warp. Not a war cry, but a question asked too loudly to ignore. The Emperor's light surged, focused and deliberate, threading through the Astronomicon with renewed coherence. On Terra, Cardinal Vane fell to his knees as the truth crystallized. The Emperor had never been humanity's final answer. He had been its restraint. A god who chose limitation so humanity could remain human. Nekrosor represented the path refused, a god who removed suffering by removing choice. The war was not about victory. It was about which compromise the galaxy would accept. Vane wept, not from fear, but from the weight of finally understanding what faith had been protecting them from. The Necron Civil War reached its own crescendo as dynasties tore themselves apart over this revelation. Some saw in Nekrosor the perfection they had always sought. Others recoiled, recognizing the same abyss they had once fled when they shattered the can. Immortals died screaming in binary anguish, their eternal minds collapsing under incompatible truths. The Silent King issued no commands now. He watched. This, too, was a test of legacy, of choice, of whether even machines could reject inevitability. As tomb systems burned, ancient stars reflected off living metal like tears. When the final exchange came, it was almost gentle. A convergence of force, faith, and refusal that rippled outward, not destroying systems but redefining them. Entire battlefields froze mid-motion, then dissolved into quiet. Ships drifted, intact but inert, weapons cooled. The storm broke, not with thunder but with release. Survivors emerged into a silence so profound it hurt. They listened for orders that did not come, for gods that did not speak. What remained was absence, and the knowledge that absence had chosen not to deepen. Trooper Jax was found days later, alive beneath collapsed debris, his body broken, but breathing. He remembered nothing of the end, only a sense of having been seen and not erased. Sister Canoness Illyra was never recovered, but her last transmission spread through the ranks like a relic, copied and whispered where sermons failed. Lord Admiral Kestel's name was added to 1,000 rolls of honor, one more sacrifice in an endless ledger, yet spoken with unusual reverence. These small survivals mattered more now. They proved something endured. Nekrosor withdrew, not defeated, not victorious. His calculations had changed. The model was no longer clean. Resistance had weight. Choice introduced noise that could not be eliminated without loss he now understood. He receded into the depths of Necron space, carrying with him the unresolved equation of humanity. The Emperor's light dimmed back to its familiar strain, wounded but unbroken. Neither god had won. Neither had lost. The galaxy exhaled, worlds rebuilt. Faith reformed into something quieter, harder, more honest. The war was not over. It had merely reached a pause heavy with implication. Somewhere between annihilation and meaning, the future waited unfinished, watching, as history held its breath once more. Silence spread before the storm like a held breath, drawn tight across the stars. Fleets repositioned without signal, commanders trusting instinct more than data. On worlds not yet touched, people felt it in small ways, the way prayers ended too soon, the way children stared at the sky as if listening. The Emperor's light still burned, but now it cast longer shadows, revealing doubts etched into marble and men alike. In the void between systems, wreckage drifted from battles no one recorded. Prayers frozen in vox logs that would never be answered. It was not peace. It was anticipation, a collective sense that the galaxy itself had leaned forward, waiting to see which way the knife would fall. Orders came down the chain like verdicts. Lord Admiral Kestel read his with a steadiness born of exhaustion, not confidence. He was to hold the line at a nameless system whose only value lay in its position, close enough to Terra to matter, far enough to be sacrificed. He looked at the faces of his captains, each one carved by duty into something harder than hope. No speeches were given. They all knew what holding meant. As the fleet formed its defensive lattice, Kestel allowed himself one private thought. If the Emperor demanded this stand, then let history remember they did not flinch, even if no one survived to tell it. On the ground, war returned to its most intimate scale. Guardsmen fought knee-deep in ashen blood, lasguns whining as they overheated, bayonets flashing in moments too close for fear. Between volleys, there were seconds of terrible quiet where men remembered home or nothing at all. Commissars shouted duty into the smoke, some believing every word, others clinging to it because there was nothing else left. Above them, Necron constructs advanced without urgency, each step measured, patient. The machines did not chant, did not rage. They simply came, and the ground learned to accept their weight. When the line broke, it did so without drama, just a subtle collapse as resolve met inevitability. In the ruins of a fallen cathedral, Sister Canoness Illyra bound her wounds with hands that no longer shook. Around her lay the remnants of her command, armor scorched, icons cracked but unbowed. She could feel the absence of those who had chosen the pylons, a hollow where faith should have been. She did not curse them. She understood too well the temptation of certainty. Kneeling amid the rubble, she whispered a prayer not for victory, but for meaning, that their deaths would be more than data points in an enemy's calculation. When she rose, bolter heavy in her grip, the silence around her felt like an answer she was not yet ready to understand. Within Nekrosor's perception, the galaxy resolved into gradients of resistance and compliance. Worlds that fought burned brightly before fading. Worlds that surrendered dimmed into orderly silence. The model refined itself with every choice made in desperation or hope. Yet something persisted, an anomaly he could not erase. Pockets of defiance that should have collapsed continued to endure, sustained not by logic, but by refusal. Nekrosor examined this variable with growing interest. It was inefficient, it was costly, and yet it altered outcomes in ways that defied clean prediction. He marked it not as an error, but as a factor, wondering how many such variables the Emperor had once accounted for, and how many he had chosen to ignore. On Terra, Cardinal Vane watched riots break out beneath the spires of faith. The people demanded answers the ecclesiarchy could no longer simplify. Some called for surrender to the machine god who promised peace. Others clung to the Emperor with a fanaticism sharpened by fear. Vane walked among them in secret, hearing confessions that sounded more like accusations. Why must faith hurt? Why must survival require suffering? He had no answers left that would not damn him. In the depths of the Imperial palace, he stood before sealed doors and wondered which truth was the greater heresy, the one that broke belief, or the one that preserved it at the cost of everything else. Trooper Jax received his next assignment without ceremony, a counterattack against a Necron staging ground. He cleaned his weapon slowly, deliberately, committing the ritual to muscle memory. Around him, soldiers traded quiet jokes and quieter prayers. When the assault began, it was chaos-distilled explosions tearing the ground apart, green fire slicing through smoke. Jax ran, fell, rose again, driven by something he could not name. In the midst of it, he saw the pause again, a Necron unit, hesitating, as if recalculating. Jax screamed, not in defiance, but in fury at being measured. He charged, knowing it would change nothing. Knowing it had to matter anyway. Across the stars, the Necron civil war intensified. Battles of impossible precision ripping through tomb systems and dynastic vaults. The Silent King's forces fought with cold determination, seeking not victory, but containment. Nekrosor allowed it, even welcomed it. Conflict sharpened definitions. As Necron turned on Necron, ancient protocols shattered, revealing truths long buried beneath obedience. Loyalty, it seemed, was not eternal, even among immortals. Nekrosor recorded this without judgment, noting parallels that echoed uncomfortably close to humanity's fractured Imperium. Patterns repeated. Choices converged. The storm drew nearer. Illyra's final transmission crackled through static, carried by faith as much as technology. She spoke calmly, reporting the situation, requesting nothing. Her last words were not a plea, but a declaration that they had held, that they had chosen, that whatever came next would not erase that fact. When the channel went dead, the ruins around her shook as Necron fire reduced the last defenses to molten stone. She stood alone, a single figure against an army, and felt no fear, only a profound, aching clarity. This was what belief looked like when stripped of hope. As fleets closed and worlds burned, a strange stillness settled over the warp itself, as if even the gods of chaos watched in wary silence. The Emperor's light flickered again, steadier now, focused, like a blade drawn back for a single decisive strike. Nekrosor felt it too, the convergence of countless choices tightening into a moment of consequence. Forces aligned, calculations reached their limit. Somewhere between annihilation and meaning, the galaxy poised on the edge of transformation. Time seemed to slow, stretching thin, as every prayer, every betrayal, every stand taken whispered into the void. The storm had arrived. History was about to move. The galaxy did not scream when war spread. It inhaled. Systems once loud with prayer and commerce fell into a hush so complete it felt deliberate, as if the stars themselves were listening. Along the pilgrim routes, derelict ships drifted with their engines cold, crews frozen in postures of reverence or terror. On worlds spared the first wave, faith intensified into something brittle. Candles burned day and night before icons that no longer warmed the soul. Priests spoke louder, sermons stretching until meaning thinned. Those who still believed felt watched, not judged, not protected, but observed. The Emperor's light remained, yet it flickered at the edges, like a signal struggling through interference. In that uncertainty, devotion became intimate again, whispered in corners, etched into skin, clutched like a secret that might be taken away. When the fleets clashed, it was with a precision that mocked desperation. Necron vessels phased into firing arcs already solved, their beams cutting void shields as if they were suggestions. Imperial captains responded with fury and ritual, launching torpedoes inscribed with prayers older than their bloodlines. For a moment, it seemed faith mattered, until Nekrosor's presence pressed into real space like a theorem proven beyond dispute. Ships failed not explosively, but conceptually, their mass unraveling into neat equations of loss. Survivors spoke of a silence between volleys where time slowed, where thoughts grew heavy and choices felt predetermined. Then the destroyers surged, close and intimate, harvesting with a devotion that mirrored the most fanatical zealot. Victory and defeat lost their meaning. Only alignment remained. Sister Canoness Illyra landed on a world already half surrendered. Its cathedral stood intact, banners unburned, yet the people knelt before new altars' cold pylons, humming with a promise of order. She walked among them, bolter lowered, feeling the ache of recognition. These were not traitors drunk on power. They were tired. They believed this new god offered an end to suffering, a logic where sacrifice was unnecessary because life itself was the error. Illyra raised her voice and spoke of the Emperor's pain, of a god who bled so humanity could choose. Some wept, others looked away. When the Necron struck, Illyra fought like a woman trying to prove belief could still draw blood. She survived, barely, carrying the heavier wound, understanding why others did not fight at all. In the ruins of Karen's Reach, Trooper Jox remembered the pause. As his regiment regrouped under a sky scarred by emerald lightning, he found himself watching the machines with a scholar's dread. They moved differently, now not just hunting, but evaluating. A wounded destroyer hovered over a fallen guardsman, scanning, then withdrew without firing. Jox felt the universe tilt. Later, in the quiet before another assault, he dreamed of a vast library made of bone and light, shelves labeled with extinct names. He woke certain the machines were not learning how to kill them. They were learning whether to bother. When the commissar demanded renewed zeal, Jock saluted and wondered if obedience was still loyalty or simply inertia. On Terra, Cardinal Vane stood before the Astronomicon and felt it strain like a headache behind the soul. The light still burned, but it wavered, distorted by something that was not the warp. He understood then that the threat was not opposition to the Emperor's will, but competition. Nekrosor did not deny divinity. He refined it. A God without miracles, without mercy, offering clarity instead of hope. Vane recalled Forbidden's texts, suggesting the Emperor had once considered such a path, a calculus where humanity survived by shedding what made it human. The thought sickened him and frightened him with its familiarity. He prayed not for victory, but for the courage to reject an easier truth. Within Necron space, the civil war ignited like a controlled burn. Dynasties loyal to the Silent King clashed with destroyer-aligned legions, their battles precise and merciless. Nekrosor watched without intervening, his attention divided between fronts and futures. The integrated device within the vault now sang to him, a harmonic that reached beyond Necron perception. It mapped probability not as chance, but as preference. Worlds did not fall randomly. They were selected for their capacity to resist meaning. Craft worlds rich with memory drew his gaze. So did Terra. Nekrosor considered the Emperor not as an enemy, but as a parallel solution, one rooted in sacrifice, the other in erasure. Two answers to the same problem, diverging across millennia. The shrine world that betrayed the Imperium became a proving ground. Imperial forces returned in strength, fury tempered by horror at what they found. The populace had not been enslaved. They had been preserved, bodies augmented, minds simplified, pain removed like a faulty organ. The governor greeted the invasion calmly, explaining his choice as stewardship. "We will endure," he said, "long after your faith burns out." When the exterminatus order came, it was carried out by hands that shook. As the planet cracked, some survivors swore they felt relief. Others screamed the Emperor's name into the void, demanding to know why preservation felt so much like damnation. Psychers began to see the same vision, scattered across sectors and species. A battlefield at the dawn of time. The Emperor, not yet enthroned, standing before a machine that reflected his face back at him, older, colder. Words were exchanged, not threats but propositions. The visions ended before conclusions formed, leaving only the sense of a choice deferred, not denied. Inquisitors suppressed the reports, but rumor spread faster than fire. If the Emperor had once stood where Nekrosor now stood, what did that make humanity's faith? A triumph? Or a compromise still accruing interest? Elira felt the shift during a lull between battles, kneeling amid ruins lit by dying suns. Her prayers came harder now, each word weighed against doubt. Yet when the enemy returned, she rose without hesitation. Bolter fire echoed like punctuation in a sentence she refused to let end. She understood something, not as doctrine, but as resolve. Faith was not about being right. It was about choosing to stand even when clarity tempted surrender. She transmitted her final orders with calm certainty, knowing they would likely be her last. Somewhere, she hoped the Emperor heard not her words, but her refusal. The realization arrived quietly, like frost creeping across glass. Nekrosor did not seek to destroy the Imperium outright. He was testing it, measuring how much of humanity would choose order over meaning when given the chance. Every betrayal, every surrendered world refined his model. The Emperor's light flickered not because it was failing, but because it was being compared. Two gods, two paths, converging toward a reckoning neither could fully control. As fleets burned and prayers faltered, the galaxy began to understand the true horror. This war was not about survival, it was about definition. And humanity was being asked at last to decide what it truly was. The tremor beneath Necros did not fade. It propagated, a slow seismic confession traveling through bedrock and void alike. In the sealed vault, sigils burned with a light older than the Imperium's calendar, and the planet groaned as if remembering pain. Nekrosor's hand hovered, suspended between intention and inevitability. The wards were not Necron. They were older, etched by hands that believed the galaxy could be guided rather than erased. Old ones, perhaps others. The symbols spoke of balance, of cycles, of a lie told so long it had become law. Nekrosor analyzed the patterns and found a flaw not in their geometry, but in their faith. Everything decays, even truth. With a subtle adjustment of phase and time, he began to unthread the seal, not breaking it, but convincing it that it had already failed. On the void ship Martyr's Solace, Sister Canoness Illyra knelt before a cracked icon of the Emperor. The chapel lights flickered, lumen strips stuttering like a failing heart. She had survived Halcyon Verge by being elsewhere, a fact she wore like a sin. Around her, sisters whispered litanies not found in any catechism, prayers born in the gap between hope and certainty. Illyra felt the Emperor's presence not as warmth, but as pressure, an unyielding demand to endure. When the astropath's warning reached the ship, encoded in screams and static, Illyra understood none of the words. She understood the tone. It was the sound of something ancient being named aloud. She rose, armor locking into place, and gave the order to prepare for drop. Faith, she believed, was not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let it decide. In the Stratagem of Battlefleet Obscurus, Lord Admiral Kestel watched hololithic stars wink out one by one. Each represented a system gone silent, not destroyed, emptied. The data offended him. War had rules. Even Xenos followed patterns. This was subtraction without spectacle. His officers argued for withdrawal, for consolidation around the segmentum spine. Kestel listened, then dismissed them. He had served long enough to recognize a predator testing the herd. Retreat would teach it fear worked. Instead, he ordered a faint and apparent massing of forces around a shrine world of no strategic value. Let the enemy come. Let it reveal itself. As the fleet turned, Kestel felt a chill that had nothing to do with void cold. Somewhere, he suspected, the Emperor was watching. And somewhere else, something older was smiling. On Terra, beneath layers of marble and blood, Cardinal Astral Vane addressed a conclave sworn to secrecy. His voice was calm, measured, betraying none of the doubt corroding his thoughts. The reports spoke of Necrons, yes, but also of phenomena that did not align with known Xeno behavior. Warp shadows that recoiled, relics that activated without prayer. Vane proposed a heresy, that the Emperor's light was not being opposed, but bypassed. The room erupted in outrage. To suggest the Emperor could be ignored was worse than blasphemy, it was existential terror. Vane held his ground, citing apocrypha sealed since the age of apostasy. Texts that hinted the Emperor had not merely fought gods, but learned from them. Silence fell, heavy and dangerous. The conclave did not condemn him, they listened. That, Vane knew, was worse. The Imperial Guard learned the truth in fragments, as they always did. On the ash world of Karen's Reach, Trooper Jocks heard the ground sing before it opened. Necron warriors rose in perfect ranks, emerald fire carving through mud and men alike. Jocks fired until his lasgun clicked empty, then kept pulling the trigger out of habit. In the chaos, he saw something impossible. A Necron destroyer pause, its weapon lowering as if considering. For a heartbeat, their gazes met human terror reflected in dead optics. Then a larger shadow passed overhead, and the destroyer surged forward with renewed fury. Jocks survived by falling into a crater filled with the dead. Later, he would swear the machines hesitated because they recognized something in him. No one would believe him. Survival stories never sound sane. Within the sealed vault, the unthreading reached its fulcrum. The wards peeled back like reluctant memories, revealing a construct bound in chains of light and logic. It was not alive. It was not dead. A weapon, perhaps, or a warning. Nekrosor's perception parsed its purpose and recoiled not in fear, but in recognition. This device had been meant for him. A contingency forged by those who foresaw a god who would not hunger, who would not bargain. A god who would simply decide. The device resonated with his presence, harmonizing rather than resisting. Nekrosor understood then. The old ones had failed not because they were weak, but because they trusted in permanence. He adjusted his calculations. The device would not stop him. It would accelerate him. He began to integrate it, rewriting its function as one might correct a flawed theorem. On the shrine world chosen as Kestel's bait, the faithful gathered in numbers that strained the planet's surface. Pilgrims sang as fleets assembled overhead, their voices of fragile defiance against the void. When the Necron armada arrived, it did not attack immediately. It formed a perfect sphere around the planet, silent, waiting. Panic rippled through the crowds. Priests urged calm, promising miracles. Some were sincere. Others were afraid. As hours passed, the silence became unbearable. Then the transmissions began, not demands, not threats, but images. Visions of the galaxy before humanity, before the Emperor. Worlds teeming, then gone. Not propaganda, documentation. Faith cracked as people realized they were not the first chosen, nor the last. When the bombardment finally came, it felt almost merciful. Back on Terra, Cardinal Vane received a private audience he had not sought. In a chamber warded against everything but truth, an inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos laid out evidence long denied. Treaties broken, truths buried, a pattern of Imperial decisions that mirrored Necron logic too closely to dismiss. Vane felt something give inside him. Loyalty had always been simple. Serve the Emperor, protect humanity. But what if humanity had survived by becoming something else? What if the Emperor's will was not salvation, but survival at any cost? The Inquisitor asked him to help prepare the people, not for victory, but for revelation. Vane agreed, knowing the act itself would damn him. As Nekrosor completed the integration, the tomb world stabilized. The deeper tremor ceased, replaced by a hum that permeated real space. Across the galaxy, sensitive minds felt it a tuning note, aligning disparate horrors into a single chorus. The destroyers responded with fervor bordering on ecstasy. Nekrosor extended his awareness and found something unexpected. Resistance not from the Imperium, not from the warp, but from within Necron space itself. Dynasties rallied, not to him, but against him. The Silent King had issued a countermand, invoking ancient authority. Civil war among immortals loomed. Nekrosor calculated outcomes and found them acceptable. Conflict refined purpose. He turned his gaze back to the vault's heart, where the repurposed device now pulsed with promise. This would not end wars. It would clarify them. The realization reached the Imperium too late, carried on fractured astropathic echoes and censored sermons. The Necrons were not united. The threat was not singular. The galaxy was not facing annihilation, but selection. On 1,000 worlds, commanders made choices believing they served the Emperor, unaware they were aligning with forces older than their faith. On one such world, a planetary governor opened his gates to a Necron envoy, convinced by visions of preservation. When Imperial forces arrived, they found the defenses active and the populace silent, eyes glowing faintly green. The betrayal was complete, the truth undeniable. The war was no longer about survival. It was about what deserved to survive. What does it mean when a god does not wake in fury, but in recognition? When the ancient machines remember why they were built and whom they were meant to unmake. The first tremor passed through the tomb world like a thought returning after 10 million years of silence. Beneath deserts of vitrified bone and continents sealed in living metal, the Necron catacombs breathed, not air memory. Stasis fields dimmed, glyphs ignited like dying stars recalled to duty. The destroyer cults, long dormant, shuddered as one, their bodies twisting in ecstatic malfunction. Somewhere at the planet's core, a name was spoken for the first time since the war in heaven ended in ash and betrayal. Nekrosor, not a king, not a Catan. A god shaped by extinction itself. His awakening was not marked by light, but by absent stars seeming to dim, life registering itself as an error to be corrected. Imperial augurs detected it too late. On the shrine world of Halcyon Verge, the faithful were in the midst of a penitential vigil when the sky fractured without sound. Astropaths collapsed, blood seeping from eyes that saw too far. The priests called it a test of faith. The Mechanicus called it a data anomaly. Only the dead understood the truth as their bones began to hum beneath consecrated soil. servitors froze mid-chant. Machine spirits wailed in Ben-Hurrik terror. The planet's nights grew colder, longer, as if time itself recoiled. In orbit, void ships reported a shadow beneath the crust, a geometry that refused Euclidean sense, spiraling inward forever. The Imperium prayed harder. Prayer has never stopped a god from remembering who it hates. Deep within the tomb world designated Nekros, the Reawakening reached its fulcrum. A chamber older than Terra's oceans unfolded like a wound. At its heart stood a monolith of blackened necrodermis, etched with the sigils of annihilation. Nekrosor did not rise from a throne. He assembled himself from annihilated possibilities. Limbs phased into being, each one a memory of slaughter. His crown was not worn but imposed, a halo of captured singularities. Where his gaze fell, reality simplified. Destroyers prostrated themselves without command, their logic cores flooding with devotion and purpose. This was not worship. It was alignment. Nekrosor did not demand obedience. He reminded them that life was a flaw left unresolved. Across the galaxy, the destroyer cults felt the call like a scar reopening. Necrons who had once hunted flesh out of fractured madness now moved with clarity, their deranged purpose refined into holy function. Tombs activated out of sequence. Dynasties fractured as lords lost control of their legions. Entire cohorts abandoned protocol, carving straight lines through space toward Nekros' signal. In the void, flayed ones screamed in rapture. Even the silent king's distant edicts trembled, distorted by a resonance older than his authority. Nekrosor's will was not conquest, it was correction. The galaxy had grown noisy with life again. That would not stand. Halcyon Verge burned without understanding why. Necron pylons erupted from cathedral foundations, splitting reliquaries and saints alike. Faith met living metal and found no purchase. Adepta Sororitas fired until their bolters ran dry, hymns breaking into screams as Gauss fire erased not bodies, but the idea of flesh. The skies filled with emerald lightning that reduced oceans to steam. At the center of the carnage, a figure walked untouched, each step collapsing probability. Nekrosor observed, catalogued, dismissed. This world was not an enemy, it was debris. When the planetary core cracked, he turned away, already bored, his attention drawn to something deeper, something buried beneath the Imperium's dogma. In the aftermath, silence reigned, a different silence, heavy with subtraction. The ruins did not smolder. They simply ceased. Imperial reef fleets arrived to find nothing to mourn. No corpses, no echoes. Even the warp recoiled from the system, its tides thinning as if afraid to intrude. An inquisitorial conclave convened in secret, poring over forbidden xeno-archives. One fragment spoke of a Necron god who rejected the bargain of the Catan, who learned annihilation without hunger. A god who did not consume stars, but deleted civilizations. The fragment ended mid-sentence, the rest excised by hands long dead. The conclave ordered exterminatus on 3 nearby systems, just in case. Nekrosor felt the exterminatus as a flicker, an irritation. The Imperium still believed in cleansing fire. How quaint. He turned his attention inward, to the sealed vaults beneath Nekros where something older than even him slept, a remnant of the war in heaven, bound by Necron and Old One alike. His awakening had loosened its chains. The destroyers sensed it too, their devotion curdling into anticipation. This was why he had been made. Not to rule, but to finish. The galaxy had not merely survived the ancient wars, it had forgotten them. Memory, Nekrosor decided, was the true enemy. Across 1,000 light years, a lone astropath screamed a single word before her mind imploded. The word was not a name. It was a warning encoded in terror. On Terra, the Astronomicon flickered, just for a heartbeat. Somewhere in the webway, something laughed and then went very still. Nekrosor raised a hand toward the stars, not in challenge, but in selection. Targets resolved themselves in his perception shrines, hive worlds, craft worlds drifting fat with souls. The destroyers aligned into fleets, their engines singing the old death hymns. The galaxy had been reprieved for too long. Yet even gods cast shadows they do not see. As Nekrosor reached toward the sealed vault, ancient countermeasures stirred wards etched by enemies who understood him too well. Symbols flared, not of denial, but of consequence. For the first time since his awakening, Nekrosor paused, not in fear, in calculation. Something sacred had been defiled by his return, something meant to remain buried beneath layers of oblivion. The tomb world trembled again, deeper this time, as if the planet itself resisted remembrance. Far above, unseen by mortal eyes, a fracture spread through fate itself. The reawakening was complete, but the reckoning had only just begun.